Yeah, thank you. I'm just gonna, wow. Thanks, Janine. This is super nice. Um, I'm thinking that I will try to share my screen and go from there. Yeah, let's see how this works. Woohoo! I think I got it. How's that look?
Looks good, Joe.
Great,
Am
Joe.
I there? Is it me? Yeah,
Yeah.
right on. Yeah. So, yeah, my name is Joe Scott. I am a member, enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. My ancestors are among the Rogue tribes, specifically the Takelma people. Uh, I'm currently the director of the Traditional Ecological Inquiry Program, which is a tribal youth internship that's focused on ITEK, specifically fire ecology for tribal youth. Um, I, as Janine mentioned, I'm on the Indigenous Gardens Network Steering Committee, which we do a lot of work there at Vesper Meadow in both of those capacities with the Indigenous Gardens Network and TEIP. I just recently was awarded a fellowship, the Indigenous Placekeeping Artist Fellowship from the Grand Ronde tribe. I'm a tribal educator. I've taught in 409J, 509J, 4J schools, Lincoln County Public Schools, so a variety of school districts, tribal and non-tribal. And I'm a cultural fire practitioner and fire carrier, which will become a little more apparent what some of those things mean. So yeah, I think the thing that would make sense is to just start with a little bit of tribal history of Western Oregon. Never want to assume that folks know things about our ancestors and how we came to this place. So there we go. Yeah, I love this. I always start with this. It's a quote from my friend Esther Stutzman, fellow Siletz tribal member, storyteller. Her and her daughter Shannon travel the state and all over the place telling stories. Um, that's a quote from her. I love it. It's about the Willamette Valley, this beautiful valley that people came into the country and found everywhere around Western Oregon. Just these beautiful landscapes of very abundant meadows and forests and oak trees and savannas and rivers, all these abundant places full of food and life and giving. And I think, people didn't really realize that these were tended lands, that this land was not simply provided to them by provenance. It was actually an engineered landscape in a lot of ways. So fire being a really key element of that engineering process. So I'll get to that in a second. These are first that picture there is it's a place in the valley where, yeah, a kid from the high school across the street like went out there and was like having a smoke or something and lit fire to the meadow, and it burned up, which is arguably not a good thing, but here like 3 years later, 4 years later, the area that was burned is all cleared out. There's a camas meadow that emerged from the burned out area, some fresh water that wasn't there before. So, I mean, these are some of the positive impacts that can come from burning. Again, there's a little sketch of the valley when people first came here. People found this just open rolling meadow that was full of oak trees, very much like southwestern Oregon as well. So quick history. Yeah, and this is a whole conversation in and of itself, and I'm not going to do it justice in just this very short period of time. The history of the tribes here in Western Oregon, much like the history of the tribes and indigenous people all over the world, is one of catastrophic impacts of colonization. We were removed from our homelands, which separated us not just from the land, but from those landscapes that we had been tending and loving since the beginning of time for us. So the sequence of events kind of goes like this. There's time since the beginning, right? They call it time immemorial sometimes, but like our stories tell about that time. So we really do have those things in our memories. First contact happened over a period of time, explorers came up the coast in the 1700s, and then exploration missions went through our country in the early 1800s. And then the gold rush is really what had the most face-to-face impact on us. And this was on the tail of a series of three pandemics that decimated our populations. So the gold rush brought outsiders into our country with the mind that they would get rich off the gold in the land, with no regard for the people. Us, the indigenous people, were seen as in the way, and we were murdered in large numbers, and ultimately forced off of our homeland with the assistance of the U.S. government, the Army, vigilantes. In any case, we were given a very large reservation on the Central Oregon coast, 1.1 million acres. It was a very large reservation. Over a period of 27 years, that entire reservation was taken from us through a series of reductions, and then the allotment period. And then ultimately in 1954, our tribe was terminated. Our status as Indian people was taken from us by the government. We went through a very hard time without federal recognition. All of those agreements, those contractual agreements between the governments and the tribes were terminated. And it wasn't until 1977 that we were restored. We were restored as a recognized tribe and a confederacy of all of those bands and tribes you can see there on that map. Yeah, this is just a couple of images of how quickly our reservation disappeared. From 1855 through 1855, then 1865, then 1875, then 1897. Just got smaller and smaller. Now, there's a really amazing, excellent book written by Charles Wilkinson called "The People Are Dancing Again." If you want to know a history of the Confederacy, the Siletz tribe specifically, this is a great resource. So let's get into cultural fire and what that is. So cultural fire is, it's something that Indigenous people have all over the world have been, engaging with fire on the land to tend, to care for, working with this element fire to enhance food production, to keep the land clear, to support growth for forage for animals, just the best element for human people to work with. And there are hints all over in our current worlds that show us that this was happening, whether it's those giant, beautiful heritage oak trees that are just huge, great big canopies. There are growth rings, fire scars on trees that you can see. Sometimes you'll see oak trees that have conifers growing over the tops of them. That's a message that, fire used to be here, and the reduction and elimination of fire has allowed these conifers to return, and they're choking out the oak trees. So there are these hints, there are these messages from the past fires. This is what fire does now. And I noticed there are a couple of people in here from Southern Oregon, folks who remember some of the 2020 fires. Very traumatic for people, incredibly destructive. Displaced, people died. It was a very bad period of time. That's what settler colonial fire suppression leads to, is these catastrophic fires, not small fires over time that were set by human people. Just like taking that out of the picture allowed fuels to build up, and those fires happened. Painting fire as the enemy was really the policy of the government, and ended up being policy, period. Really from the very beginning, from first contact, our fires were outlawed. Indigenous people were shot on sight if they were seen setting fires. A lot of Indigenous folks went to jail, and it had a lot to do with this really violent narrative about fire being, a massive thing that needed a heavy attack to suppress, all these words that are about attacking fire and about fire being the enemy. And of course, what does that make people who are using fire, that our ecological practice ends up the enemy too. All of these foods, they depend on fire and we depend on them. It's a beautiful camas meadow there, cultural burning, burning in the hands of people, reduces the litter that's on the ground. It returns nutrients to the soil that feed those underground bulbs. Those oak trees, fire does everything from smoke the branches and the blooms and help pollination and reduce insect infestation. There's a little tarweed sprout there. Tarweed needs fire to spread, to be harvested. Fire is part of the process. It's just beautiful fire adjacent plants that have co-evolved over time with humans to need fire as we need them. This is a reflection of the importance of fire in indigenous cultures, is the words. Our languages reflect this amazing relationship with fire that we've had and continue to have. The map on the right is kind of hard. It's pretty elaborate language map, but really the point is that fire is at the center of the words for home, the words for family, the words for the ground. It's like the fire is at the center of those things. And there are a couple of phrases there too that excuse me that are phrases from various languages from southwestern Oregon that describe what you will find there, and they're all fire related landscapes, fire designed, fire affected landscapes. So what is the difference between prescribed fire and cultural fire? So the agencies, the idea of prescribed fire has a lot to do with fuels reduction and resource management. When I say resource, what I'm talking about is like timber. Timber as a resource. So the Forest Service has a definition. The National Park Service has a definition. Lots of different, many worded definitions that describe resource management. And only recently, and to their credit, have they started to really recognize that prescribed fire is different than cultural fire, which is, we'll get to. So cultural fire, I don't like reading the words off the screen in a PowerPoint presentation, but yeah, cultural burns, it's an intergenerational thing. It helps develop a healthy, resilient landscape. I heard Ron Good, who's really a legend in cultural this thing. It's not about the fire, it's about the community. So when I say community, what I mean is that it brings indigenous communities together. That's Ron in the upper right. I got to meet him, just spent the last weekend with him down in Mariposa burning. But when I say community, I mean families, right? Families engage with the land and fire. Children learn how to do this. Elders are talking about it. We're all together. The practitioners are harvesting sticks. We're digging food. Like it's a community-based event. Really, that's what defines cultural fire. And here's some really great pictures. This is at Vesper Meadow. This is the Vesper Meadow Cultural Fire Inquiry Days, the very first event we had. And as you can see, it's a community-based event. There are practitioners from other of Americas and the Caribbean. So having these cultural fire means these are, like I said, the Smithfield Oaks Night Burn Project. That was great. Community came together. We were there to tend some oak trees and did so in a community context. But yeah, burning to make sure that those oak trees produce acorns that don't have insects in them. So pretty cool. Same thing at Vesper Meadow, doing some burning to reduce thatch and doing so in a community way. This is, cultural fire is about indigenous fire science as well. recognizing these incredibly intricate cycles that the plants and the animals and the people all go through and that we actively participate in. Yeah, burning at the right time of year takes out those acorn weevils. And I love this, the connection between science and ceremony, indigenous fire science, right? That's a pileated woodpecker. Those are incredibly important part of our dances in the sense that that little fire that they wear on their head goes on our regalia. Those hats are a display of wealth. They're an acknowledgement of the first animals, our relationship with the creator. So fire ties us to that animal, and that animal ties us to the creator. So yeah, oh, and that's me when I was a child wearing what's called a tall hat. So fire is used as as a tool in managing cultural resources. So one of the most important things that we work with is hazel sticks, and you'll get into that in the curriculum as well. We use hazel sticks to weave everything from I have a couple of pictures here, but those, and I'll share some other pictures too, but those sticks need to be long and straight and perfect and not have the little nodes on them. The way you do that is you burn the plants off to the ground, right? And then they grow these perfect straight sticks that are integral part of our basketry. And it goes beyond the beauty of those baskets. The technology that goes into actually engineering the sticks, allows like the perfect kinds of weaving materials. These are ceremonial caps that women wear in world renewal ceremony. So again, a connection between fire, community, creation, ceremony, cultural fire. Super important to have the right kind of sticks if you're going to weave a baby basket that holds, the next generation, right? You've got to have a good high quality basket. To get that, you have to have good high quality sticks. And that's a fish trap. Got to have fire designed, fire influence weaving materials for that if you want to catch some fish. There are a couple of other tools there, a quiver, a mortar basket for grinding acorns. These are really important tools that people depend on. The Indigenous Placekeeping Artist Fellowship I did was really exploring fire starting, fire carrying, the different approaches to how cultural fire works as an element in our communities. That's like every stick I ever had, and I brought it to this my residency, spread them all out on a table, and took a picture. And yeah, fire starting, like all of these intricate relationships that go into the materials, right? The materials have to be right to bring on the next generation of fire. If you don't have like the right drill to start the fire, right? That's important. Carrying fire, that's a thing, like showing up with the fire. Who shows up with the fire? How do you get it there? And, these are traditions, these are traditional ways of doing things. Those traditions are vital. They define who we are. So there's an incredible level of importance to this work as well. And I'm just real quick, and I'm almost done, I promise. But ceremony in the sense that, what was I going to say? There in the bottom center there, that's actually a madrone tree that's up on Upper Table Rock, and it's struck by lightning. And lightning struck trees produce charcoal, and that charcoal, specifically that charcoal, is used to make tattoo ink that's used by men to tattoo your arms to measure dentalium shells. So there's another connection between fire, culture, and the element itself, and the plants that we're all tending, right? So the creator gives us that resource through lightning, through fire. Ocean spray is the one I'm working with recently. Oh, this is up at Vesper Meadow. Actually, this is a group of kids helping out with us burning some ocean spray. Does the same thing that hazel does, grows up nice straight sticks. You got to have those sticks if you want to make a good gambling deck, right? Those are cards, right? They're called Indian cards, those little sticks right there. It's a lot of work making those little sticks. And I made a drum. Anyway, yeah, so all of these things involve fire ecology, all the materials that go into them. all of the objects, all of these incredibly important cultural items, again, that define us, that make us who we are, that that carries our culture into the next generation. So returning to the homelands there, we're taking fire back in a lot of places to our homelands. And it's an element of our sovereignty, ecological sovereignty, establishing our ecological practice on our ceded lands, our homeland. So returning with fire is really an act of sovereignty. And that fire is really community-based, culture-based. And that's it. Wow, that was a lot of words really fast. So I feel like that was about 20 minutes. So I think Stasi, is it do we have time for anyone to ask any questions if they're interested?
Yes, we do. Thank you. I would say maybe a good way to ask questions is to raise your hand, and we can call on you. What questions do people have? And thank you, Joe, for that beautiful presentation.
Maybe none.
Maybe no questions. No questions?
I have a question. And then I see somebody else raised their hand, so I'll be really quick. But Joe, you had mentioned the creating the tattoo ink from the ashes, and then I may have misunderstood you, but I thought you said the tattoo was to measure a shell, maybe. And I'm like, wow. Could you talk a little more about that?
I have some stuck in my ear. They're called dentalium shells, and they're a traditional form of wealth, right? They're literally called Indian money from back in the old days. And the way the shells were measured, strands of shells, they were strung in strands of 10, and then men would have tattoos on their arms. You would hold it and then measure the shells, the string of shells. The longer the string of shells, the more it was worth in terms of trade goods. So yeah, I know I blew right past that one, but super important though, right? You got to know where your money is. You got to know how to do it. And to do that, you got to have fire. Thanks for asking that. I love that
question. Youth education program. I think I saw your hand go up first, and then Karen.
Hey, Joe, thanks for sharing. It seems like a lot of these products and traditions and that relationship is built on cycles and generations and a continued adherence and relationship to the land. And so my question is, when that relationship is interrupted and those cycles are broken, what's the first step in terms of practice of fire, burning, carrying, starting? What's the first step to sort of restart the process?
I'm so sorry. I had to turn off my video because you were glitching, and that's all on me. Could you say the first words that you said?
Of course. So it seems like a lot of these traditions, the crafts, the tools, the tangible things are built on cycles and generations of fire and product and growth and regrowth. And so when that process is interrupted, when the cycles are broken, how is the process restarted? What are the first steps to, I guess, regrow that relationship to fire and land and product?
Another really great question. That actually is the work that I've been doing through the fellowship, is working on with everything from archival materials that just literally have explanations of how people worked with fire, to working with elders who retain a lot of that knowledge. There are recordings of our ancestors. A lot of linguists came through, linguists and ethnographers came through in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Wrote down their observations, recorded our words. Of course, those come at us through a settler lens, but they really contain a lot of good information. also a lot of that, it's ancestral knowledge. It's in us. These things just make sense if we're tied to our ecology, if we're working with the plants, if we're working on the land. Like, these things make sense in a lot of ways. Yeah, so and a lot of it, like I said, a lot of it is something that makes sense from an ecological standpoint. So starting these fires again really is, again, a community. It's a community thing. So sharing that knowledge, getting together with other people who have all the bits and pieces, and sort of putting it all back together.
Great, thanks.
Hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Joe. Karen, you're next.
Thanks, Joe. My ears perked up when you talked about the pileated woodpecker, because we have a lot of evidence and sightings of those at our sites. Is there a chance that I might be able to share with my students your connection and the significance of the pileated woodpecker to the tribes of Confederated at Siletz? Is there, maybe it's in the curriculum, I don't know. Is there information I might share with the students?
Well, absolutely. That connections, wow. I'm trying to think about how to access the information. I guess what I'm saying is that there are a lot of stories that you can find. I hate to refer people to the internet, but a lot of times those are a good resource. There's actually a really good UROC curriculum that's available online that's very specifically about feathers, that has information about the relationship with pileated woodpeckers. So that information is out there. My personal connection to it, beyond what I'm sharing today, that's really, like, that's the story. But yeah, there are resources out there, but like I said, it might be Karuk, I can't remember, but one of the Klamath tribes has this awesome, it's a youth curriculum that's specifically about feathers. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Joe. I see you, Hannah. We also had a question in chat from Jenny. How frequently were meadows burned to keep camas and oak healthy?
Another excellent question. So camas meadows, there's evidence, there's records of that kind of burning happening, everything from yearly in some meadows. I think the window would go up to 3 years. And I think it all really depends on, things like elevation and the conditions of that year from one year to the next. I know there was much like, people cycle through crops now, in a Western sense, that people tended and harvested in different areas through time over different years. So it was variable, but meadow burning frequently was yearly. Some of the savanna burning was definitely yearly or every other year. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. Sounds like it depended on what function the fire was serving of when it would be burned.
Yes,
Hannah.
absolutely.
Hannah, I see your hand up. You got a question?
Yeah. So on your slide where you showed some of the fire adapted foods, you mentioned that you had camas and Oregon white oak and tarweed, and there was a fourth plant, and I didn't recognize it, and I wonder which one that was. I think it was in the top left.
Again, blew right past that one. That's a one variety of yampa.
Thank you.
Which is another root tuber, I think. I don't know what the proper word is. Another underground food, another relative that lives under those meadows that benefits from the nutrients being returned to the soil. Plus, it breaks up the soil, makes it easier to dig those. Yeah.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you, Joe. Another question from chat from Libby. Could you tell us more about that nighttime burn event? Was burning sometimes traditionally done at night?
good, man, all these great questions. So, one thing that I am learning, a thing that I'm learning through the fellowship work is that fire diversity is a thing. Burning throughout the year traditionally happened. The night burns would be done because the life cycle of certain insects, whether it's the moth stage or the early opening larval. Boy, I get my stages mixed up. But there are stages that these insects are particularly vulnerable at, and with acorn weevils, there's a period of nighttime vulnerability. It's the moths; they just fly into the fire at night, right? So that interrupts their life cycle.
So fascinating. Thank you, Libby. Thank you, Joe. Dan, I see your hand up. Can't hear you, Dan.
Dan's working on it.
Maybe you could also maybe type your question in chat, Dan. Awesome, thank you. I see Kendra stepped away, but Kendra had a hand up as well. Oh, Kendra, you want to ask your question?
Yes, sorry about that. My dog was being very loud. So,
No.
Hi, Joe. I'm so glad to get to hear from you today. I understand maybe we have a connection. I live in Soap Creek Valley, and I think that you have even come out here, but that's beside the point. I also work for Greenbelt West, and we oftentimes do a lot of oak restoration on our properties. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of give me like your idea of what main points you suggest we make about cultural practices when we're telling people about the history of these properties.
Main points.
Mm-hmm.
I would say the main point is that human people are a keystone species, and that people and their, people with a healthy relationship to the land are an integral part of a whole healthy ecosystem. So specific practices might involve everything from, burning at a certain time of year to collecting and harvesting, and selective, selecting plants, selective seeding, reseed, all of these things affect that. But the main point is that humans are a really important part of these ecosystems.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Kendra. Dan, I didn't see a question in chat. I don't know if maybe you chatted someone privately. I do see a question from Liesel, thinking about, oh, there we go, Dan, thank you. Thanks, Joe, amazing talk. I'm interested in how you think about the complex connections among language, knowledge, identity, ecology, and cultural practices. In particular, the importance of language, vocabulary, expression in these cultural and ecological practices.
Wow, how I think about it. A lot. Wow, that's a super complex question. So, there's a map that's in my head, that I've seen other people, it's part of the awesome conversation I have with people who are, ecologists and then linguists. Everyone, particularly like stories, like our legends have information about fire. So learning from our stories, the words within the stories, the maps that people's stories or people's words draw, the connections to songs and ceremonies. Like it would be hard for me to sort of encapsulate that, but recognizing that those things exist, I think is really the main thing. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. That is a complex question, Dan, and I think that's something that this curriculum book kind of covers all of those things that you mentioned. But thank you for your question, and thank you, Joe, for adding on to that. I think we maybe have time to touch on one other thing. Liesel, I see in chat, you had kind of asked a question. Thinking about teaching students about how fire was used and also taking into account the trauma many students and families have connected to fire. Was fire controlled? If so, how? How closely? Question mark.
So fire was a companion. Fire traditionally, before suppression, is a partner in tending the land. I have no doubt that every once in a while, fire would escape into the mountains, but fire was very much intentional. The use of fire was very, focused on a particular resource or a technique that resulted in an outcome that was beneficial to the community. So it was a constructive practice by definition, and its suppression and the buildup of fuels and houses in the woods. Those are the things that result in damage and death due to wildfire. And yeah, working in this context with people who are directly affected by and traumatized by wildfire, hopefully the message that we're sharing is that through a good relationship with fire, and using traditional tools and techniques, and really putting Indigenous people in the lead of making decisions about how fire is used as an ecological restoration tool, will help people understand that there's a cultural component. It's a constructive force, a constructive partner. I like the word force. Anyway, yeah, I hope that that one's another really complex one, because you have to absolutely have to recognize that there's trauma involved when fire is a bad part of your life.
Yeah, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Liesel. I think we're coming to the point of needing to wrap up Q&A.